when you start changing everything and things start working, it is impossible for you to go back and pinpoint what actually worked. So you want to get into the habit of being able to isolate one thing at a time to say, hey, I have a hypothesis that if I change the color on this ad, I will get a better result. Hi, everyone. It's Allison Williams here, and welcome to another episode of the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast, where today we are going to talk about testing for success. Test for success. That is today's topic. So what do I mean by test for success? Well, I want to start with a little story that will kind of frame this for us, and it deals with one of our clients here at LFM. This client is crushing it. They are already just shy of $1 million. 2 years into working with us, they started out at about $175,000, and they're already well on their way to $1 million. And I remember talking to this person, and at some point, she asked me, well, can you tell me which of these particular graphics you like? And it was for a billboard that she was going to, not a billboard, kind of a billboard. It was a visual presentation that was going to be placed into a public space. And she asked me which of the two that I liked. And I said, well, how are you making the decision other than asking people? Because I can certainly give you opinion, but why is my opinion any more valid than the next person? And she said, I don't really know. We took a lot of photography. We have a lot of great images, and I really just can't decide. I love them all. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. And I just figured I would go around and ask people that I respect, and you made the list. So I was like, oh, thanks. But I don't think that that's the way you should approach it. And she said, okay, well, tell me more. And I said, well, what have we taught you about how to choose graphics for your website? And she said, oh my God, that applies here too? And I said, yes, it applies everywhere that you're looking at visuals, at least everywhere where you are looking to have a monetary outcome on the other side of the visual that you are presenting. So she repeated back to me, test for success. Okay. And what that means is basically A/B testing. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard the phrase A/B testing, but I want to go a little bit into some of the minutiae of it so that we can get a framework for how to do this in our law firms. Because a lot of times, part of the reason why law firm owners don't test out graphics to make sure that they are using the correct one, and I'll tell you what is correct in just a moment, right, is the one that gets you the most money, right? But a lot of times the reason why law firm owners don't do that is because they feel, I have so much to do. I have so much that needs to get accomplished. At this point, I just need the pictures taken. I just need the pictures used. The pictures are what the pictures are, right? A pretty picture is a pretty picture. But there are a lot of things that we can oftentimes overlook when we are not using a strategic approach to how we are making the decision around which graphics to use. So the first thing I want to remind you of is that there are certain rules of thumb, even with visual presentation, right? I'm sure you all have heard some of these rules of thumb. Red is a powerful color. Standing with your arms crossed is a power pose, right? Being seated with feet and knees facing inward shows community, collaboration, etc. Right? Some of those guiding principles, I am sure we all have heard, and even the photographers that stage us for our different branding shoots will tell us, hey, you want a power pose? Let's do this. As opposed to you're trying to connote warmth and inviting, let's do this, right? So there are some basic data point rules of thumb. But what you are trying to accomplish when you are putting visuals onto a website is not just, oh, look, here is something interesting and attractive to look at, right? That is a very small part of it. But what's most important about your images on your website or on any form of advertising, frankly, is how it is received by the vast majority of people who fit into your ideal client avatar category. So if you think about who you want to sell to, how do those people receive the image that you are putting out? That's the same question, by the way, that you're going to be asking about all forms of media and all forms of marketing messaging that is going to go out to those to whom you want to sell. So that means the copy that's on your website, the staging of your website, how you configure things, right? There's a whole lot here that we could get into in terms of the minutiae of how to build a great website, right? We're not doing that today. But I just want to orient you to the idea of why it's important that you don't think about this as simply a visual preference, like John likes it, Susie doesn't like it. Steve dislikes it, Amy loves it. You don't want to create a preference orientation when you are thinking about what to do with your visuals. You want to test them. Okay. Now, when we say A/B testing, I'm talking about some very tried and true methodologies. If you're working with a digital marketer, they will be familiar with these tools, and ultimately they will do this for you. But whenever you have a thought around what you want your website to look like, you should be thinking about it from the perspective of what do I want? And more importantly, what does my marketplace want? Right? What am I going to get the most traction from when I place it in front of my ideal client avatar? Some of that can be discerned simply by virtue of focus grouping, right? You can send your images out to people and ask them. But there are lots of different ways to A/B test. In fact, you can A/B test things that are completely off platform for what you are trying to accomplish. For instance, I was recently listening to a podcast. I won't identify the podcast, even though it's one of my favorites. And the host said that he wrote a book and he couldn't decide which cover art he loved the most. So the way that he decided on what the cover art would be was to run Facebook ads. And he put a certain budget behind the Facebook ads and ultimately had a pre-order. And people that pre-ordered the book under image number 1 compared with image number 2 told him what ads were getting the most traction. Now, of course, there's a lot that goes into running Facebook ads and how to do that effectively. But one of the things that it does provide you as a benefit is the ability to have lookalike audiences and to go into the weeds of how many men versus women am I showing this image, what age group is being shown this image, what type of behavior is happening online with the people who are clicking on this image. In other words, am I doing retargeting? So I know that they ultimately clicked on our website at some point. Are these people going to certain other spaces that I can have access to? So there's lots of different ways to ultimately dial in to confirm whether or not the people who you are targeting fit the demographic that you actually want to target. But once you recognize that you are essentially going to have to test the image, there are some tried and true process matters that you really need to attend to in order to get the best result. So I want to give you 3 rules today about A/B testing that can help you to get to a better result, a better outcome using A/B testing of your visuals in any form of advertising or marketing for your law firm. Okay, so number 1 is you always want to start with a hypothesis, right? You don't ever want to test something without knowing what you are going into it thinking might be the outcome. Part of that is really refining your gut, right? We've talked a lot about this on this podcast, but there is some intuition that goes into being a business leader that a lot of people will undervalue, will demonize and say, if it's not logic, if it can't be read from a book, if it isn't something that comes out of a spreadsheet, it doesn't have meaning. But here's the thing. There are always going to be subjective elements to your decision making because we are human and you are creating what you desire in a business. So even if a data point tells you that you're going to get 1% more in category A, but it's something that's repulsive to you, but category B is something you love that you're going to get 1% less, I'm sure you're going to choose category B, right? Or at least the smart business owner would choose category B because you're creating for you, right? So you have to keep that in mind. But the other thing to keep in mind is that when you start with a hypothesis, it allows you to start looking at trends and start testing against trends from the perspective of asking yourself, how likely am I to get this right? Because there will be times where you can't A/B test, right? There will be times where you can't test everything. You don't have the budget for it. You don't have the time for it. A decision has to be made in your absence. A decision has to be taught to someone else to make. So there are definitely going to be times where you're not going to be able to run an A/B test, and you need to start thinking about what sorts of ideas do I have around my marketing, my visuals, etc., that I can reasonably trust versus those that I think, on the whole, I really need to have some data tell me because I honestly don't know. It's a crapshoot. Could be left, could be right. Who knows, right? Okay, so you always want to start with a hypothesis. Number 2 is that you always want to test one variable at a time. Now, this is really important because and this is, by the way, one of the quintessential problems that we see with law firm owners as they are growing and scaling. What tends to happen is that you get so excited that things are working that you want more of what's working. Or, the flip side, you are so terrified that things are not working that you are desperate to change any and everything in order to get back to success. And one of the ways that we have had to really curtail the trajectory of some law firm owners, especially when they first come to coaching and they say, "Oh my God, I've got this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong and I want to change it all right now," is that we have to say, whoa, slow your roll. Let's take a breath. Let's figure this out. Because when you start changing everything and things start working, it is impossible for you to go back and pinpoint what actually worked. So then you have a problem that now you have a new panoply of activity that you have to retain, some of which may not be financially prudent, some of which may not be successful at all, some of which might actually be counterproductive to your success. But you don't know that because you changed everything at once, and now you have a suite of different choices that are all kind of conglomerated into one mechanism, right? So you want to get into the habit of being able to isolate one thing at a time to say, hey, I have a hypothesis that if I change the color on this ad, I will get a better result, right? So I'm going to run the ad with a blue background and I'm going to run the ad with a yellow background. Which one is going to do better? Okay. Don't change the font at the same time. Don't change the lettering. Don't change the messaging. Don't put your call to action in a different part of the ad versus the second ad. You only want to change one thing. You want these ads to be completely identical with the exception of the one variable. Okay. That allows you to isolate. Now, depending on what you are testing, you can then start to run success against, failure, right? So if I hypothesize that the blue background is going to do better than the yellow background, the yellow failed, right? So the blue is the winner. Then it moves on to the next round. And then I might test the blue background against the green background. And let's say in this test, the green background wins. Okay, great. Now I'm going to test the green background against the orange background, right? I keep testing until I get to the optimal result or as great a result as I can tolerate and moving forward with my ad campaign. But the idea is that you don't want to start changing a lot of things at once, right? So going back to our first scenario, if you had changed both the blue background to the yellow background and you had changed the lettering from, let's say, Times New Roman to Arial, well, if the blue ad performs better, was it the color or was it the font? You don't know, right? Because you have two things at play. So it's really important to isolate and only test one variable at a time. All right. Third consideration that's really, really important about your A/B testing is that you want to repeat your A/B testing periodically. Okay. Now, this is what I mean by this. When I say periodically, it's really hard for me to put a timeline on this unless I know exactly what we're talking about. But generally speaking, I think the set it and forget it methodology is one of the problems that we are trying to address by this particular rule. A lot of times when business owners start the process of marketing, they build their first website, they build their first landing page, they create their first e-newsletter, right? They put something out there, and that something out there starts to perform. And they either are happy with those results and they want more, or they are unhappy with those results and they want to fix it to get to success. However you are experiencing your marketing, it's going to have one of two outcomes, right? At least in this instance. Now, what I see happen for a lot of folks is when they get to success, they're like, okay, great. E-newsletter is working. Now let's go over to the website, right? Or e-newsletter is working. Now let's hop over to the podcast. Now, that's not universally a bad thing, right? There are only so many hours in a day. There's only so much attention in the day. And until you get to the stage where you can staff up a successful tributary of your marketing such that you can now shift your focus elsewhere and continue to have that one area be mastered and managed very well, you're always going to be shifting focus to a certain degree, right? It's kind of the nature of having a smaller workforce. However, one of the challenges that you have when you have a smaller workforce and you are shifting is that a lot of times I think we take for granted that what we did that was working will continue to work. Now, how frequently we should go back and A/B test to make sure that we are getting the best outcome is really challenging to answer, because for a lot of us, what tends to happen is we don't go try to fix something until it's broken. Okay. What you'll find for those companies that scale is that what they do is they fix things that are working to make them work better. Okay. It's that 1% change here, that 2% change here, that 5% change here, not, hey, I'm going to gut this thing over here and do something completely different, right? It's the fact that you are optimizing. Optimizing is oftentimes about just a very small improvement, but that small improvement can get you additional market share. And that small improvement can improve a system that then once that small improvement happens, it can start to get you more opportunities all the way up, right? Intake, perfect example. If you optimize the performance of your intake professional, right, the person who's answering the phones to book consults, that person gets on the phone and let's say you tweak the script a little bit. So let's say the script is working and the person is scheduling about 60% of people that call in. And let's say for your market, for your marketplace, for the amount that you charge for your consults, that is a good percentage. Okay. I'm not going to judge whether that number is objectively good or bad. Let's just say 60% is a good percentage. You're happy with it. Okay. So now you're focusing on other things. Well, at some point, maybe you say, okay, this is not broken, but maybe it could be optimized. So what do? We look at our script, we tweak our script, and we get from 60 to 65. Well, an extra 5% of scheduled consults doesn't sound like a lot until you consider that in the course of a month, this person could talk to, let's say, 100 people. So that's 5 more people that get scheduled for consults. And let's say you have a really good salesperson and that person is closing at 60%. Okay. Well, if they have 5 people to meet with and 60% of them are closing, you're going to have 3 new clients at the end of the month. That could be an extra $30,000 to $50,000 in your law firm, give or take, depending on what you charge for your service. So that small percentage led to pretty significant revenue, right? 30 grand a month, 360 grand a year. I'm sure most people would not turn it down. For some of you, that might be a significant amount of money. For others of you, it might not be that much, but I'm sure you wouldn't turn it down, regardless of your size of your law firm, right? So again, when we are A/B testing, it's really important that we understand some basic pragmatic skills that go into A/B testing and doing it well, right? Once we recognize the importance of it, we have to have a hypothesis. We have to make sure that we're only testing one variable at a time. And of course, we need to repeat the process periodic to optimize our results. All right, everyone. I'm Allison Williams. You've been listening to the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast. I will see you on our next episode.